In my town, there's a cemetery nobody is allowed to be buried in anymore. Not because it's full, not because it's abandoned, but because the last family who buried someone there dug the grave back up 3 days later. When I was a kid, adults used to say the old cemetery was cursed. They'd lower their voices whenever they talked about it, like even saying its name too loudly could make something hear you. I never believed any of it, at least not until my father died. The call came at 2:13 in the morning. A sheriff from my hometown telling me that my father had suffered a heart attack while sitting on his porch. He said they found him staring toward the forest behind his house, the direction of the old cemetery. What unsettled me wasn't the death itself. My father was old, sick, bitter. It was the final thing the sheriff said before hanging up. He kept repeating something before he died. He said, "Don't let them bury me there." I hadn't been back to Black Ridge in almost 15 years. Small town in northern Oregon. Endless pine trees, wet roads, fog that never fully lifted. The kind of place where every house looked permanently cold. As I drove through town, nothing seemed changed. Same rusted gas station, same church bell, same people staring too long at passing cars. But the moment they recognized me, their expressions shifted. Not welcoming, nervous, like they already knew why I'd come back. At the funeral home, the director refused to look me in the eyes while discussing burial arrangements. His name was Walter Green. Thin man, pale skin, hands that shook constantly. When I asked about cemetery plots, he immediately slid a paper across the desk and tapped a specific section. "Anywhere here is fine," he muttered. "Just not the old grounds." I laughed a little. The cemetery in the woods. Walter's face changed instantly. The color drained out of him so fast, it honestly looked painful. He leaned closer across the desk. "Listen carefully to me," he whispered. "If anyone asks, your father was buried in St. Mercy Cemetery. You understand?" That was the first moment I felt genuine fear. Not because of what he said, but because he sounded terrified someone else might hear him saying it. That night I stayed in my father's house alone. The place smelled like mildew and cigarette smoke. Most of the furniture was covered with white sheets. While searching for clothes for the funeral, I found dozens of handwritten notes stuffed into kitchen drawers. Every single one mentioned the same thing. They are not sleeping. Some notes were worse. Don't listen if they call your name. They use familiar voices first. If you hear scratching under soil, walk away. At first, I assumed dementia, grief mixed with paranoia. But then I found the map. An old hand-drawn map of Black Ridge Forest, with one location circled repeatedly in red ink. The old cemetery. Beneath it, my father had written 3 words. "She is there." My mother disappeared when I was 8 years old. One day she was home, the next she was gone. My father always claimed she abandoned us, never elaborated, never allowed questions. But staring at those words sent something cold through me. Around midnight, I heard knocking at the front door. 3 slow knocks. I opened the curtains, expecting police or maybe a neighbor. Nobody was there, just fog rolling across the porch. But on the wooden steps leading to the house, there were wet footprints, bare human footprints. They stopped directly at the front door. Nothing leading away. I didn't sleep after that. Around 4 in the morning, I started hearing another sound. Faint, rhythmic, almost impossible to notice at first. It was coming from beneath the floorboards. The sound continued for nearly 10 minutes before suddenly stopping. And when silence returned, I heard my mother's voice from somewhere inside the house. "Daniel." I froze completely. My mother had been gone for over 20 years, but I knew that voice. Every part of me knew it. Soft, gentle, exactly as I remembered. "Daniel, please." The voice came from the basement door. I actually started walking toward it before catching myself. My hand was already touching the basement knob when I remembered one of my father's notes. They use familiar voices first. I backed away so quickly I nearly fell. The whispering stopped instantly, like whatever was down there realized it had failed. The next morning, I drove into town and asked an old bartender about the cemetery. The entire bar went silent. Nobody even pretended not to listen. Finally, an elderly woman sitting near the window spoke without turning around. "The dead stay awake there," she said quietly. Nobody laughed. Nobody argued. She told me the cemetery was older than the town itself. Settlers buried hundreds there during a brutal winter in the 1800s. Disease, starvation, exposure. Graves dug too shallow because the ground froze solid. Then strange stories started spreading. Families hearing crying beneath fresh graves. Children claiming dead relatives stood outside bedroom windows at night. One man even dug up his wife after hearing her voice calling from underground for 3 straight nights. "What did he find?" I asked. The woman finally looked at me. Her eyes were wet with fear. "Scratch marks," she whispered, "inside the coffin lid." I left immediately after that. But as I stepped outside the bar, the bartender grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. "Your father visited that cemetery every week," he murmured. "Whatever he was looking for, he never found it." That night, curiosity overcame fear. I drove to the forest road leading toward the cemetery. Rain hammered against the windshield the entire way. The deeper I went into the woods, the quieter everything became. No insects, no birds, just the sound of rain and tires over mud. Then I saw the gate. Rust-covered iron fencing surrounded the cemetery. The entrance chain had been snapped open recently. I knew immediately because the metal still looked fresh where it broke. Somebody had gone inside. Recently. The graves were wrong. That's the first thing I noticed. Every headstone faced north instead of east. Some graves had heavy chains wrapped around them. Others looked disturbed, like the soil had shifted from underneath. Then I saw movement between the graves, a woman standing perfectly still in the fog. I couldn't see her face clearly, just pale skin and dark hair hanging motionless around her shoulders. My stomach twisted because deep down, I already knew who it looked like. "Mom," I whispered. The figure tilted its head slowly, too slowly, like something imitating human movement rather than understanding it. Then it spoke in my mother's voice. "Why did you leave me here?" I ran. I don't even remember reaching the car. I just remember hearing footsteps behind me the entire time. Bare feet slapping wet ground. Fast, getting closer. And right before I slammed the car door shut, I heard dozens of whispers surrounding me in the dark. "Stay. Please stay. we're lonely. I sped back home, shaking uncontrollably. But the horror didn't end there. Because when I reached my father's house, the front door was already open. Inside, muddy footprints covered the hallway floor. Bare footprints, fresh, leading toward the basement. That scratching sound started again immediately, louder this time, violent. I grabbed a flashlight and forced myself downstairs. The basement smelled like wet dirt and rot. In the far corner, hidden beneath old blankets, was a wooden hatch built into the floor. Heavy locks covered it from the outside. My father had chained it shut, and something underneath it was moving. The hatch trembled slightly as a voice whispered through the wood. "Daniel." My mother's voice again, crying now, weak, desperate. "Please, let me out." Then another voice joined hers, my father's. "She's lying." I stumbled backward in horror. My father's voice continued from beneath the hatch, calm, exhausted. The cemetery learned our voices years ago. I couldn't breathe. He explained everything in broken whispers. My mother never abandoned us. She died during a winter storm after crashing her car near the forest. The town buried her in the old cemetery before the ban was enforced completely. 3 days later, my father heard her voice outside the house, begging to come home. He dug her grave open himself. "What did you find?" I whispered. Silence filled the basement for several seconds. Then my father answered, "Nothing buried there stays human." The hatch suddenly slammed upward violently against its chains. Something underneath screamed, not in pain, in rage. Multiple voices blended together beneath the floorboards. Men, women, children, all speaking at once. "Let us out." The lights went out instantly. In total darkness, I heard movement all around me. Bare feet across concrete, wet breathing inches from my face. Then my mother's voice whispered directly beside my ear. "You left me underground for so long." I ran upstairs blindly and locked myself inside the bathroom until sunrise. The next morning, I decided I was leaving Black Ridge forever. I packed everything into my car before dawn. But before I drove away, I noticed something sitting on the kitchen table. A photograph I had never seen before. It showed my father standing beside my mother near the old cemetery gate. Written on the back in my father's handwriting were 6 words. "It knows who you belong to." At the bottom was a date. Yesterday's date. My father had supposedly died 3 days earlier. I drove out of town immediately and never returned. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear scratching beneath my apartment floor. Slow, patient. And 3 nights ago, I woke up to hear my mother's voice outside my bedroom window. The terrifying part wasn't what she said. It was the fact that she sounded closer than before. Thanks for sipping tonight's tale with Haunted Brew. Don't forget to subscribe and sleep tight if you still can.